Hey, welcome to Football Never Sleeps, our off-season Notre Dame football YouTube show. And we're going to run this weekly at least through the April 22nd Blue Gold game, maybe even further than that. Look at a lot of off-season news before we get to spring football. Because of this variable format, more than ever, we need you to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that whenever we have new content, including stuff from spring practice, not just this show, you'll get a notification. You'll know when to tune in and see what color shirt I have on. As with Monday Night Live, we will take your questions during the show. We'll work them in during our topics as they pertain to what we're talking about. And we're going to start our conversation soon. So start filling up the question portal.
Yes, and we did thankfully hit 1,000 subscribers after last week's show. So thank you to all our new and old subscribers who helped us get there. This means we can start monetizing our channel and continue to give you guys the content that you want to see. So please give us more feedback as we move forward. We want to keep providing stuff that you guys want to watch and listen to. And we're also trying to reach out to our 1,000 subscriber who is Previn Dutt, at least according to the username. That's username Previn Dutt 9464. So if you're hearing this, send us an email, insidendsports@gmail.com. Again, insidendsports@gmail.com. And then Eric will give you one of his fantastic prizes that he has in store. So
That's
we'd
right.
like to be able to thank you for being our 1,000 subscriber. But like Eric said, get some questions in. We'll get to those as we're discussing. But as you can imagine, we have a pretty obvious place we want to start, and that is Notre Dame's offensive coordinator search. So, Eric, why don't you set the table for us?
Right. So I'm giving it a little bit of taste from both Notre Dame's standpoint and how the media chases this. But let's start out with where things stand. So we're already several days into this search. Tommy Rees left for Alabama last Friday. The search started very soon after. And right now, I would say there's probably a handful of candidates that are really being publicized, and that would include a group of Utah offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig, Kansas State offensive coordinator Colin Klein, Colorado offensive coordinator and recent Kent State head coach Sean Lewis, Toledo head coach Jason Candle, Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, with some, amounts of refuting those candidates going out there. I think some things are smoke screens. There's guys that'll get involved in a coaching search because they want to raise. And there's some guys that get involved in a coaching search because somebody throws their name in there. So, but we believe that's kind of the core group. It's a very fluid situation. Eagles quarterbacks coach Brian Johnson, who's somebody that I really liked in the search, said publicly he isn't interested. His team is playing in the Super Bowl Sunday. We'll see if he still has the same tune after the Super Bowl is played. Joe Moorhead's another name that was mentioned that could enter the search but hasn't to this point. That's someone a lot of the people in the media have kind of identified that would be a good candidate. Byron Leftwich publicly reached out to Marcus Freeman, the former Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator. It doesn't look like that's going to get much traction. But again, keep tuned into our website because this picture is going to change daily.
Yeah, I think there's as much that isn't known about what's going to happen with this as there is that is known. I think part of that is intentional. I think Notre Dame is trying to keep information closely guarded, and I think that's not terribly surprising. You don't want to look like you've reached out to 6 offensive coordinators and they've all told you no or whatever. And so I think the more names that get thrown out there, obviously only one's going to get hired. So I think trying to keep that as concealed as possible sort of falls in line with how we've seen some things handled over the past 12 months, I would say. So we'll see how it develops moving forward. I think the newest sort of name to be on that list is Colin Klein from Kansas State, which is intriguing. Anyone who is aware of FlightAware, the flight tracking service that you could look online, notice that there was a flight for Manhattan, Kansas earlier this week, and then went back. So I think that was Wednesday, and then Thursday there was a flight back. So someone from Manhattan, Kansas was, or a plane, and maybe the plane was just empty, just flying back and forth for no reason. But that is something that has occurred. We'll see.
Could have been our old friend Nettie, who used to work with us at the Tribune.
So yeah, we'll see what comes of that. That one, if Colin Klein, like, I don't know if he would even leave Kansas State. I mean, he's a Kansas State lifer, played there. He's Kansas State's Tommy Rees, with more success as a player, I would say. And obviously had a successful 2022 season, I would say, as an offensive coordinator. He was thrown for a loop with having to use two different quarterbacks in Adrian Martinez and Will Howard. But that is sort of a name we're sort of monitoring at this point, and we'll continue to monitor. What did you think of that name sort of being in this group, Eric?
Well, it's funny because I'm like, Colin Klein, that name sounds so familiar. And then it struck me that there would be just this poetic justice if it ended up being him, given what happened in 2012. It was Johnny Manziel, Manti Te'o, and Colin Klein on the Heisman finalists. I actually interviewed him in New York City when I was there for, Manti's ceremony. The other thing that's kind of funny is Oregon and Kansas State that year were 1 and 2 in the BCS standings, and up through 10 games. And Notre Dame and Alabama were right below them, with Alabama the only one having a loss to Johnny Manziel. And so Notre Dame was hoping one of those two teams would lose. Well, they both lost. Then Alabama and Notre Dame moved up. But if just Oregon had lost, Notre Dame would have played Kansas State. And I think I would have liked their chances in that game, or at least being competitive.
A little bit better than the way it ended up playing.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it was Colin Klein's fault. They got beat by an unranked Baylor team by 4 touchdowns, and it was the defense gave up a lot of points. But I thought that Colin Klein, so that would be interesting. There's things that I like about him. I kind of came up with some criteria before the search really got going very far. He checks the box in terms of a recruiter, doesn't really check the box a lot in experience, although he's coached quarterbacks quite a few years. And I think he's been involved in their offense, just not calling plays more than the 1 year. Does he have NFL? Is he NFL friendly? Is his offense NFL friendly? Probably not as much as you would like, but given who his quarterbacks are, you've got to design your offense around your quarterback skill set. And then can he evolve an offense, evolve Notre Dame's offense from being maybe a little bit into more multidimensional, having wide receivers actually catching touchdown passes. And that's kind of an unknown. So that would have to come through in the interview process and people vetting him with other people. So I don't say, boy, I hope it's not him, but I do think that there should be candidates that check more of the boxes. But he's an intriguing guy. I mean, he'd be a tall offensive coordinator, a lot taller than Tom. He's 6'5". But I don't. I want to know more about him. But he does. Again, when you kind of commit yourself to certain deal breakers, he kind of skids by on a couple of them.
Yeah, his NFL ties, which it's funny. I knew this name, but I didn't know the player went to Kansas State. Skylar Thompson, who, if you watch the NFL at all, he ended up starting the playoff game for the Miami Dolphins. He's actually their 3rd string quarterback, and was the 7th round draft pick this past year in 2022. And because of the injuries, was sort of forced in there, but he played in a few games because of that. And so that's so Colin Klein has him to point to as sort of like an NFL protege, but I don't know that. I mean, Skylar Thompson wasn't exactly lighting it up in his opportunities for the Dolphins, but he wasn't necessarily expected to. Brock Purdy was the more successful 7th-round pick this past season in the NFL, but I think you're probably in a little bit better of a situation in that 49ers offense. So I think certainly the ability to prepare Sam Hartman for the NFL would appease to Sam Hartman, and I would imagine Notre Dame's younger quarterbacks as well. Notre Dame's quarterbacks recruits too. So I don't know that has to be a major part of it, but I think given our understanding of what Marcus Freeman values as from an offensive philosophy standpoint, the offense will likely resemble one that would be played at the NFL level. Marcus Freeman wants to run the football. He wants to establish the run and be driven by the power of the program's offensive line, which has been proven to be a reliable and repeatable strength at Notre Dame. So I think there's still plenty of work and learning to be done about where this coordinator search will go, but I think it's going to be fascinating to follow. I wanted to throw a question in here we have from M Go Irish Eric. Is there a candidate that you might have expected that maybe has not surfaced as of yet?
I think I mentioned a little bit ago, Joe Moorhead. I'm surprised he hasn't pushed himself into the thick of things there. Maybe Mike Denbrock to a certain extent down at LSU. Really loves Notre Dame, has been here twice already. Marcus and Mike are pretty good friends. I don't think there's any signs of that starting unless that's going to be a very late candidate. So those would probably be the two for me. How about you?
Yeah, the Moorhead one, I can sort of see, like, if that were to happen, it sort of being like it not sort of being known until late in the process, but given that he's a head coach, because that I think can really sort of kill the momentum as a head coach if that sort of information gets out there that you're looking for a job like that. So, I mean, you can maybe even say the same about Jason Candle, although he's already been connected to the Miami offensive coordinator job. So it wouldn't be like that would be a new thing. So I don't know that I have any other names besides those that I would have thought could have been on there. The one guy, and I can't think of his name, is Andy, and I think it starts with a K. He's the Kansas offensive coordinator. It's kind of funny with Colin Klein. Like, he probably wasn't the best offensive coordinator in Kansas last year. Kansas's offense was pretty good as well. So maybe I thought there's no like necessarily connection there that I'm aware of that would have made him an obvious candidate, but I think it's just a sort of a talented offensive coordinator on the rise that Notre Dame could have taken a look at. And then maybe they end up still doing that. I think it's too early to say that no one else's name's going to surface that we haven't already heard of or discussed at this point.
Right. The downside about NFL guys and in particular anybody that's with the Eagles or the Chiefs is that there are probably going to be some pretty good NFL jobs that those people may want to pursue, and that might slow this process down. I think, Marcus would like to get this wrapped up next week and then start sharing the playbook with his players and getting them ready for spring practice.
Yeah, I needed to look up Andy's name, Andy Kotelnicki, and I don't even know if I'm saying that right, but that is his last name, and that's the Kansas offensive coordinator who I was referring to.
Well, let's talk about this big picture a little bit, and I mean, people get confused in this because there's illegitimate websites, illegitimate Twitter accounts that embellish things and so forth. So just try to follow the sources that you trust on this. How important is this hiring, do you think, Tyler, from Marcus Freeman's standpoint, from Notre Dame's standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think it's probably it's probably not even the right word. I think it is the most important hiring that he's had to date. I think I would maybe even argue that it's more important than retaining Reese was last year for Notre Dame. Now, I think you could maybe argue against that, and there could be a good conversation there. But I just think that Marcus Freeman, given his background, isn't in a position to have a significant impact on play calling. So he needs someone he trusts. and sort of like what you're getting at, likely someone with experience. So that's why this hire is important. And I know that the timing isn't ideal in that there's been an offensive coordinator movement already, and most of that is settled. But if you're Notre Dame, you should be able to like say, okay, I've been at this school for a month, but actually, you know what, Notre Dame came calling, so I'm going to go there instead. Now, some people may have like a moral objection to that, like, hey, I gave these people my word, I can't go back on it a month into this. But Notre Dame is the kind of school that can do something like that. And I mean, we see smaller schools that do that as well, but I think Notre Dame could do that. So I think though the timing is a bit not ideal, I think there may be some advantage to, like, there's not that many offensive coordinator jobs open right now. So Notre Dame sort of knows what the field looks like. They can sort of take its pick as long as it finds someone that wants to do the job. Not everyone's going to want to come to Notre Dame or be in a situation that they would prefer to Notre Dame. So I think it's pretty important. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's as important as I've indicated?
I do. I've heard people, some people make it, this is the biggest hire in, decades for Notre Dame. I'm not sure about that.
Well, that seems a little extreme.
Right. But I mean, it's a little bit of threading the needle in that if you lean too far into the up and comer range and you bring in somebody for big bucks, you've got, Deland McCullough that's coached a lot of football, and Jared Parker, who's been an offensive coordinator, and Harry Heastan, who's a veteran guy. You need somebody that will be able to command respect because he's going to be their boss, and they're going to have a lot of autonomy. I do think it's a very significant hire in that you have suddenly a couple of quarterbacks aligned that are very elite in Sam Hartman and CJ Carr, and you want to make sure that they like this move and that they're going to be developed to their fullest, and that you're going to be able to continue to get this kind of quarterback to come to Notre Dame. Now, one of the things that in the story that I did earlier today, kind of how the history of offensive coordinators at Notre Dame might inform the future, is that, going back to 1986 when Lou Holtz started his head coaching career here, there's only been one offensive coordinator that's lasted longer than 3 years in that role at Notre Dame, and that was Mike Haywood, who really didn't call plays very often during his 4 years here. So that you need to not only make this a really good hire, you need to keep that Notre Dame offensive coordinator position as a premium job, so that the next person that comes in at the back end of CJ Carr's career is a person, if you hire a great coordinator, they're probably going to stay 2 or 3 years and move on to their next thing. And that's what happens at these elite programs. So,
right.
Yes, I think this sets the table. I do think it's a really important hire. And again, especially because Marcus isn't really in the position to do a lot of fixing. I think with each subsequent year, he's going to learn more about offense and have more opinions. But there's a lot of autonomy with this job.
Yeah, and I would think that makes it attractive, right? Like if you want to be an offensive coordinator running the show, like why wouldn't you want to come to Notre Dame? Now maybe you feel like, well, I don't know if I can get the talent there. If you're not a passionate recruiter, it's not going to be a match for you because Marcus Freeman is going to hold you to that standard. Now it maybe makes your job easier because Marcus Freeman maybe takes some of the weight and pressure off of that because he's going to help you recruit that, and you have a pretty good staff of offensive coaches as recruiters as is. So I think that it seems like an attractive job. So that's something to keep in mind as we continue to move forward here. I got a question from Ryan Muha I wanted to throw in here. Which potential offensive coordinator hires would you consider an upgrade at the position?
Okay, if I had the full, if I could include Brian Johnson in that, which
sure. I think we can include people that we might not think are realistic at this point, but I mean, but I don't know that we're not gonna. I don't think you'll name like Bill O'Brien, but like guys that could feasibly become Notre Dame's offensive coordinator, even if they're
right. I'm not going to include the Phil Longos of the world of people like that, but at least people that have been mentioned for the job. I would say Andy Ludwig would be from Utah. I would say I would feel comfortable with Sean Lewis in that role. Ryan Grubb, I think, would be an upgrade. Maybe Joe Moorhead because of his experience. Those would be the ones that I would point to that I think would be upgrades. I don't know that you could say Colin Klein. I think that's more of an if because he doesn't, he's similar in age to Tommy, has less offensive coordinator experience than him. And I think that should be Marcus's aim is to have an upgrade.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity to.
I agree with. I don't know that I would consider a Ryan Grubb an upgrade yet. He's so tied to Kalen DeBoer that I don't know how much credit to give to him versus Kalen DeBoer. So that would be one that I wouldn't be fully confident in saying that would be a definite upgrade. I don't think you mentioned Jason Candle. I would put his name in there as someone who I think could be an upgrade. So those were the only two differences based on the guys that you named that I would consider upgrades. Joe Moorhead, I don't know that he seems like a fit. Like that seems I feel confident that he's a fit. Whether or not he's better than Tommy Rees, I'm not totally sold on that. But I mean, it doesn't really matter if we're sold on it. Whoever gets the job will have to find out if they have better results than Tommy Rees or not.
I mean, you know how I feel. I think Denbrock's an upgrade over Tommy Rees, but I don't know that he works as well in this situation just because his coaching of quarterbacks is pretty limited.
Right.
If he had been coaching Jayden Daniels this year instead of coaching their tight ends, I'd probably feel a little bit different. If he had coached Ritter at Cincinnati his whole career instead of just one season, again, that would have been really a pretty darn good resume.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So one of the things that, what I wrote about today was how the past kind of informs perhaps the future. I think it was interesting that I was looking back and seeing what every offensive coordinator, what they're up to. There's only two of them are current head coaches right now, and that's Skip Holtz. He's a USFL head coach, and Chuck Martin, who's with Miami, Ohio, they like it to be said. And he's been there for about a decade now. There's some out of work guys, but I reached out to Jim Strong, who was Notre Dame's last offensive coordinator to preside over a national championship team. He was Notre Dame's offensive coordinator in 87, 88, 89. The guy's killing it in real estate. He's 68 years old, follows Notre Dame religiously, knows all about the recruits, wanted to know what happened with Peyton Bowen. And it was fun catching up with him, but he parlayed his time at Notre Dame into a head coaching job at UNLV. He lasted there 4 years, got fired, said, I'm going to do real estate for a year, and never came back to coaching. So that was pretty fun to catch up with.
That was a name that I didn't even know that person's name. And that's partial because of my age. But and the fact that his coaching career didn't last much longer beyond that. So he wasn't around college football or the NFL when I was following it as a youngster. So that was a bit of a surprise to me that I had never really sort of connected the dots. And then the fact that that's how quickly his career path changed after the success at Notre Dame was pretty interesting. So I thought that was a good story, and going that far back, just showing like this is the track record of how long offensive coordinators last at a program like Notre Dame. And that includes like Notre Dame when it's humming, and it includes Notre Dame when it's struggling. Right. And so I think that's good context to have as we look into this. Cause I know I've seen some people debating on the Insider Lounge is like, well, is it better to go after a young offensive coordinator because he's up and coming and could be a good recruiter, but does then that mean that he's not likely to stay because this could be a stepping stone for him? And then the flip side is like, well, if it's an older coach more likely to stay longer, or if it's an older coach, couldn't that person necessarily be considered a head coach sooner than maybe that offensive coordinator was. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. I don't think you go into it saying, hey, we need a young coach, we need an older coach. I do, like we've said, think it needs to be someone with experience just based on the opportunity and the, I guess, just the experience that is on staff with that coordinator and above that coordinator in Marcus Freeman.
Well, and you want the offensive coordinator job to be a stepping stone, because that would mean Marcus Freeman's successful. He's not going anywhere. And
Right.
also you look at Alabama's coordinators, and they're going to really good things from that Alabama job. So they pretty much get whoever they want.
Yeah. And I think it looks like Georgia's offensive coordinator could be on the move too. So I think, when you're the programs at the top, you're going to have a lot of turnover on your coaching staff. And I think that distinguishes some of the best coaches, the ability to continue to hire at a high level and replace guys and not skip a beat. So that's a lot to put on Marcus Freeman's plate so early in his head coaching tenure. But that is the situation that he'd like to be in, to be tasked with doing that, because that means success is coming, and you got to keep continuing to replicate that as you move forward.
I think one thing I'd like to mention too is we had John Bryce from Football Scoop on our podcast this week, and he mentioned that he felt like what he's hearing is that an 11th full-time head coach or an assistant coach is coming. They couldn't send them all out on recruiting, but it would be another position coach. So whoever was, let's say, the offensive coordinator, if you wanted to make quarterbacks coach a separate thing and have the offensive coordinator and the quarterbacks coach working with your QBs, you could do that. Another place you could go is you could hire a full-time linebackers coach at some point to so that Al Golden is really kind of an overseer, and really in all practicality, he was more of that this year with James Laurinaitis coaching the linebackers. So that's going to be something that's going to be kind of interesting to watch in the coming months if/when the NCAA implements that.
Yeah, and I mean, from Notre Dame's perspective, where does that extra job go to? Does it go to the offense? Does it go to the defense? Like, obviously, James Laurinaitis played a very important role as essentially the linebackers coach, although Al Golden is the linebackers coach as the defensive coordinator. But would you make whoever your next GA is at linebackers your 11th coach, or would you make a quarterbacks coach? And I think that could be dependent on whether you hired an offensive coordinator with quarterback coaching experience. Smoke and Scott here asked us, do you go with Jared Parker already at Notre Dame, who is on staff as the tight ends coach? I don't think that's likely, but in a scenario where Jared Parker would get promoted to offensive coordinator, you would probably want to bring in a quarterbacks coach, and maybe that would be the position you would fill there. I don't know that Jared Parker's resume is at a level in terms of the experience as a coordinator that would warrant him getting this position. I think this job is too attractive for Notre Dame to just sort of pigeonhole itself in okay, let's just promote Jared Parker and figure it out from there. I think there are too many other options that Notre Dame needs to sort through before it would maybe circle back to considering that. Obviously, Marcus Freeman respects him immensely and prioritized him as the tight ends coach option once John McNulty left the program, and has a history with Jared Parker. So I'm sure he will get some amount of consideration, but at this point, I'm not sure that that's the direction it ends up heading.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake. I think the timing's off. Maybe the next coaching search, if all those assistants are still here, Harry just wants to be a line coach, so leave him alone. But Chancey, Dylan McCullough, and Parker, I think you would have three pretty strong candidates there if they continued on their trajectory that they already are on. But I think in this case, promoting from within, you're not going to run the Tommy Rees. He's not going to run the Tommy Rees offense anyways. I just think he doesn't check enough boxes for me. That he didn't ruin Michael Mayer is not enough of a resume filler for me.
Yeah, what a job he had there. Now inheriting Sam Hartman might be make the offensive coordinator job a little bit easier as well. But yeah, I think Notre Dame's going to continue to look at some other options there.
My mom identified after watching a Notre Dame game. She goes, I think Michael Mayer's a pretty good player. And I go, Mom, you are right. So I think she could probably coach him.
That would be funny. All right. Some news that we reported today was on Adan Schuler, the freshman early enrolled safety, suffered a shoulder injury or had a shoulder injury that needed surgery. I haven't exactly nailed down how it got to the point where it required surgery. I think this was some lingering effect from an issue he was dealing with in high school. And I don't know exactly when that decision was made to say, okay, let's go ahead and do it now. But certainly,
because he played in the All-American Bowl,
right?
But I do think it goes back to that high school injury.
And so I think Notre Dame got him in here, was able to see how things were going and get a better sense for what it wanted to do with that once you have them in-house and have your doctors look at them. And so while it is a bummer that he won't be participating in spring practice, it will still put him in a position to be able to find a role as a freshman if they need him to do that. So it's better to get that taken care of now than to go through a spring with a shoulder that's giving you problems and not at full strength, and then try to get things straightened out over the summer and get ready for camp. So the decision to move forward with the surgery now makes some sense, but unfortunate for him, but he'll be able to rebound and I guess have a little less stressful of a spring semester. I know there will be plenty of work for him to do in terms of rehabbing, and they'll keep him plenty busy. But a little bit of a different acclimation to Notre Dame and Notre Dame football than probably he was anticipating.
Right. I mean, and this isn't uncommon where there's a player, they'll come in and they'll take a look and they'll go, ooh, let's get this done now. And that way they can, you say, well, they blew their early enroll advantage. Well, not necessarily, because being on campus and being around the Notre Dame doctors and them supervising the rehab, I think is a good thing. Billy Schrouth went through it with a foot last year. Jack Kaiser came in and had to get some cleanup. I mean, I can remember a lot of guys coming in and then suddenly didn't get that jump start on their careers. Now, where I think it'll be interesting, Tyler, is how do you think Notre Dame will deal with it in the spring? Do you think that this might increase the likelihood that a cornerback might get a look at safety in the spring?
I think there's a chance for that. As we look at the depth chart now, you look at 3 safeties who were contributors last year in DJ Brown, Xavier Watts, and Ramon Henderson. And obviously this is another sign that it was a good decision for Notre Dame to bring DJ Brown back, although I don't know that people in the fan base were as thrilled about that decision. But I think he's an important piece and leader in that group. Justin Walters and Ben Minnick will have even more opportunities in the spring potentially. It makes me wonder if they second guess or think a little bit longer about where Thomas Harper ends up playing. Does he play more nickel or does he play more safety? But I do think it gives Notre Dame more reason to consider moving a cornerback to safety. Do you do that in the spring right now? Do you wait? I think you probably. I would. My preference would be to do it now, because the guys that I have in mind would be Clarence Lewis and Ryan Barnes. And Clarence Lewis, obviously, I mean, he has experience as a corner, so it's not like he would be losing valuable practice time at cornerback that he hasn't had an opportunity to already have. Yeah. Ryan Barnes is less experienced on the field, on the game field, but has certainly been in the program for a couple of years and hasn't necessarily pushed through to being a contributor at cornerback. So I think those would be the guys I would be considering. I haven't heard anything for certain of what's going to happen and how soon Notre Dame would consider moving a cornerback to safety, but those are the guys that I have my eye on. What are your thoughts on whether or not they should consider that, Eric?
Yeah, I think in the spring that's a good time to experiment and see if you have something there. We're assuming Brandon Hillman is going to play safety when he shows up in June, and he did a really good job of it in the Polynesian Bowl. And he might be the best of those freshmen in terms of long-term safety projects, but especially if you have an injury this spring, and maybe a long-term injury, I would audition some of those cornerbacks just to kind of see what your inventory looks like. And you mentioned Thomas Harper, who projects more as a nickel. Could he be more of a safety in certain situations if you needed him to? So I think those are all the things you try to get to the bottom of in the spring.
Yeah, Ben Minnick's going to have plenty of opportunities now. I think that just only increases the reps that he'll have a chance to get. So certainly probably doesn't want to see his teammate go down with an injury, but it's going to be a pretty big spring for him, and plenty of workload for him. So hopefully he can handle everything that gets thrown his way in the coming months.
Well, let's go to our recruiting reset next, since we have no other injury news, which is a good thing. And so we'll start with Leonard Moore committing, long built cornerback from Texas. What do we know about Moore?
Yeah, like you mentioned, long. He's 6'2", 170. So a good sized cornerback, pairing him with Carson Hobbs, who's 6'1", 180, who also, for my understanding and in my eyes, looks like he has some pretty good length to him too, even if he isn't as tall as Leonard Moore. The rating and ranking of Leonard Moore from Rivals isn't great right now. He's a 3-star recruit and the number 34 cornerback, but we've been told by Rivals national analyst Nick Harris, who's based in Texas, that he will be getting a ratings and rankings bump in the forthcoming update for the 2024 class. Those rankings haven't been updated since prior to the end of last season. So we're coming up on an update here soon. And so that'll be reflected, and we'll see what kind of movement there is with Notre Dame's commits, because Notre Dame has a good start into its class and already has mostly 4-star recruits besides the cornerbacks. And then maybe some of these targets, I know people have been asking about, like some of the offers that have been going out to players that maybe 3-star guys. And it's like, why are we offering so many 3-star guys, is the sort of chorus response. But I think our Rivals ratings is sort of catching up with everything that's happened since this past season. And I think a lot of the football coaches with extensive paid staffs are a little bit further ahead in those evaluations than the Rivals staff was. But we'll see what that looks like. But I like the addition of Leonard Moore. I think Mike Mickens. It's interesting. He earned a lot of leeway in terms of his recruiting acumen with how Benjamin Morrison turned out this past season, as he wasn't like a big time recruit. I mean, he was still a 4-star recruit. It wasn't like he was a slouch, but he wasn't necessarily hailed as a top 10 cornerback in that class. And
I think he spent some time as a 3-star too.
So I think he gets credit for that, but then you sort of look at the sophomore classes, and there were some guys there. It's like, well, nothing's really happening. So did he miss on Philip Riley? Did he miss on Ryan Barnes? Did he miss on Chance Tucker? I think Chance Tucker is the one we've heard the most positive buzz about from that trio. So are these guys more of the Benjamin Morrison, Christian Gray, Micah Bell category, or are they more the other category? Only time will tell, but I like the addition, continued success in the Austin, Texas area for Notre Dame after getting signatures from Braylon James and Jayden Greathouse in the previous class. So, I mean, I'm somewhat interested in like what happens if some of the Texas schools come back and push for him. I would imagine that is something that was already under consideration. Like, I don't think he was rushing into this commitment from anything that I've heard. So I think they're aware of that possibly happening. But Notre Dame was a fit for him. His dad is a professor at the University of Texas, and is very academically focused. So saw Notre Dame as a fit for him, and Notre Dame liked what it saw and got him pretty quickly after making a push for him in the last couple of months here.
So with the rest of February, we're still in technically a dead period, which means no face-to-face contact, but it doesn't mean there's not contact going on. There's not things going on with recruiting. And one thing you reported was a visit for a safety who has a familiar name, or at least a familiar, well, I guess familiar first and last name. Kennedy is his first name. Last name is Urlacher. And yes, he is the son of Brian Urlacher, the former Chicago Bears great. And he's going to come for a visit when, Tyler?
April 15th. That was some news that we
day.
yeah, some news that we broke on the Insider Lounge earlier this week, I believe. He's a 3-star safety from Chandler, Arizona, who received an offer from Notre Dame after safeties coach Chris O'Leary and head coach Marcus Freeman went out to his school to evaluate him. And so that was meaningful to him that Notre Dame sent Marcus Freeman out to see him. It was Marcus Freeman's last stop in Arizona for the day. So Kennedy thought that was kind of cool too, that this was the last place he was going to be in Arizona before he took off to fly somewhere else. So he seems very interested in Notre Dame. The most, I would say, surprising part about it is Kennedy Urlacher. He's now, I believe, at 15 offers, and he has not visited any schools yet. And so Notre Dame is the first one he has scheduled. I think because it's April 15th, there's a chance that he could make it to another school in March or earlier April before he would make it to Notre Dame. But Notre Dame was the first one to get one scheduled with him. He named Penn State and Miami as schools that he'd like to go see. And I know something that people didn't love hearing was that LSU was his dream school growing up. So that could be a bit of a heartbreaker if LSU tries to swoop in there for Kennedy Urlacher. But I think Notre Dame's in a good spot for now. We'll see how that continues to progress. But yeah, this month is mostly dedicated to sort of like figuring out, okay, when can guys get on campus? And the kids themselves have to figure out, okay, which schools do I want to prioritize? Can I make the time to get to Notre Dame in the spring, or should I start considering scheduling or earmarking an official visit to Notre Dame, whether that's in April when you're allowed to start doing that, or if that's into June when Notre Dame more typically hosts its official visitors. Emmett Mosley, a wide receiver with a familiar name, with his father of the same name, being a former Notre Dame player. He intends to make an official visit to Notre Dame, though there's not a date attached to that yet. That is one of the schools that he'd like to make an official visit to. So we wrote about him recently, a 4-star wide receiver out of California that Notre Dame, I think, is in a pretty good position with. So plenty of sort of names to monitor, news to track. There hasn't been any rumblings of impending commitments at this time, but we'll continue to be looking out for that. Kyle Kelly right now on Inside Indy Sports is running a recruiting reset series where he's going position by position, sort of analyzing who Notre Dame has in its 2024 class and who's sort of being prioritized at the position beyond the commits. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be continuing that throughout this week and next week and try to get to every position. We started on offense with the offensive line and tight end so far, and we'll be getting to the rest of the offense in the coming days.
And one note, we didn't have any headlines with Justin Scott this week, the 5-star defensive tackle. I think no news is good news there. We have a pretty good source that was able to talk to Justin and his high school coach this past week. And it does look like Notre Dame is still in very good position in terms of being a viable landing spot for him. You could even say maybe they lead, but there's a long way to go with that. But nothing's been damaged in terms of, this was a kid that was getting ready to commit. They have a lot of these things. We call ours future cast, but everybody else has different crystal balls, Ouija boards, or whatever. And, once other schools got the sense that Notre Dame was closing in, then he was overwhelmed with, no, don't do it. No, stop. It's too early. So, and that gets confusing and flattering for 16, 17-year-old kid. He just turned 17 on January 31st. So no drama with Justin Scott. So he's on the back burner and in a good place.
Yeah, a back burner, but also in a place where Notre Dame, he's probably always top of mind for Al Washington. That is someone that Notre Dame really wants to get in this class and would be a great addition. I mean, Notre Dame doesn't get 5-star defensive tackles. That is not a position where Notre Dame has a lot of success recruiting the elite of the elite, and having one from the Chicago area with a interest and emphasis in academics makes him sort of a must-have player for Notre Dame if Notre Dame wants to push itself into that top 5 recruiting class in the country by signing day.
So we didn't lead with Tommy Rees leaving because the news was almost a week old.
Right.
But we'd like to circle back on some issues with that. So for those who have been off the grid or living in a tiny home in the woods
and not listening to the first 45 minutes of the show,
right? Tommy Rees is at Alabama now after 3 years of being Notre Dame's offensive coordinator, 6 years on the staff, 10 years at Notre Dame, including his 4 playing years. Boy, he's been around for a lot of my time here. He's probably sick of me, but I think the biggest issues that are kind of lingering out there is, one, how are recruits reacting to this? You've talked to several of them. What's kind of the generic response you're getting from, or the general response?
I was going to say generic seems to be a little bit dismissive, but
we'll go with the general. Tommy is so generic that we only want the generic response.
No, the guys that we've heard from all remain adamant that this doesn't impact their recruitment. They're still committed to Notre Dame. They're confident that Notre Dame will get a good offensive coordinator to replace him. They're happy for Tommy Rees. They all like Tommy Rees. Now, the one person we didn't hear directly from was CJ Carr, and that's the person everyone wants to hear from. But from our previous reporting and our understanding of CJ Carr's recruitment mindset is that he wasn't committed solely to Notre Dame because of Tommy Rees. Tommy Rees certainly played an important role in CJ Carr's recruitment, but he was fully invested in Marcus Freeman as the head coach. He knew that it was possible that Tommy Rees wouldn't be at Notre Dame either by the time he got to Notre Dame, or at almost guaranteed, like, wouldn't see CJ Carr's entire Notre Dame career out. Like, that would be we're talking about a long time frame that CJ Carr would still be at Notre Dame if Tommy Rees was still there. So that would be so certainly, I mean, the timing isn't ideal. Like, he probably wanted to get to Notre Dame with Tommy Rees here, and then if Tommy Rees leaves, that's fine. But we don't expect like a seismic shift there. Now, maybe Notre Dame makes a really weird offensive coordinator hire that CJ Carr doesn't vibe with, but I don't necessarily anticipate that happening. But you can't rule anything out for certain until you get the offensive coordinator in place, and that person can make a connection with CJ Carr. But he's not going to make like a knee-jerk reaction and sort of evacuate from the class, because he's an active recruiter in Notre Dame's class. Like, he is a vital part of Notre Dame's class and wants to get guys around him, and has done a good job of doing that with the guys that are already committed in the class. So I think he'll continue to do that despite Tommy Rees's departure.
Right. In fact, he was scheduled to go to Las Vegas this weekend with his California Powers 7-on-7 team. And again, lots of Notre Dame targets, big time targets on his team on both sides of the ball, and then let alone the people that he'll play against. But he has just done such a good job. I had a chance to talk to him a couple weekends ago. Wow, what an impressive guy. And he's super committed to helping with recruiting. And again, I can't emphasize enough Marcus Freeman's strategy about being the lead recruiter on everyone, because he knows that his assistants are going to come and go. And if he has a strong enough relationship, that's not going to affect that many recruits when a certain assistant coach or coordinator leaves. And so I think that was a pretty smart strategy.
Yeah, the combination of Marcus Freeman's sort of outlook and strategy with that, and sort of, I mean, look at what we saw with Brian Kelly's departure. We didn't see that many decommits from Notre Dame. It was a relatively small amount, and that's in part because the guys that commit to Notre Dame, they're committing to Notre Dame for the school as well. They're not just committing to Brian Kelly or Marcus Freeman. I think Marcus Freeman is doing his best to make him a major reason why, but he's also selling the reasons why Notre Dame is the right place for them beyond just because he's the head coach. So I think that Notre Dame is in a good position there to handle coaching staff movement based on its strategy with Freeman and sort of just the things that Notre Dame is selling these kids on as reasons to come to Notre Dame isn't wholly dependent on who their assistant coach would be.
I was just smiling at some of the comments that were coming in.
Is there anyone that you smiled at the most that you'd like me to bring on the screen?
Well, Michael Parks has a lot to say.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, he said recruits don't care about Tommy Rees, which
that might be a little bit harsh.
That might be a little bit harsh. And then he had just Kenny Minchie. I like Kenny Minchie, and again, I don't know that Tommy Rees was necessarily the selling point, but I think it helped, especially the nature of that one. But if Notre Dame gets a dynamic offensive coordinator, I mean, Kenny Minchie realistically isn't in line to play this year, but he certainly can start his development. He's a really intriguing prospect because he has, kind of that high ceiling vibe to him, and we're just not sure if it's going to turn out that way. But I can't wait to find out if that's inside of him. I mean, that's he's a really intriguing prospect. But yeah, I think Marcus did a really good job of, having a great relationship that would make these quarterbacks want to stick around and, not worry about coordinator changes, because they're going to happen. If Marcus is successful, coordinator changes are going to happen. Al Golden's not going to be here for 10 years. And whoever is Tommy Rees' successor is not going to be here for that long, unless it maybe Andy Ludwood would stay a little bit longer than 2 or 3 years if it were him. But I think that's a really sound strategy. There's so many things especially with that transfer portal no longer having the 1 year wait. That used to be quite a deterrent to a lot of people, and that's right. That is not there anymore.
Michael Parks has a question for us. Did the players get their jersey numbers yet? And that is something that around this time of year, I probably would have been more proactive in sort of looking into, but given the offensive coordinator search, that hasn't been a priority for me. I think some of those guys have numbers. I don't know if all of them have. I would think if some of them do, they would all have them.
Yeah, I think Drake Bowen's 34. That was the one I saw. But I will say this, we're talking to all the defensive newcomers tomorrow. They reshuffled the deck on us. We're supposed to get Sam Hartman tomorrow. It makes sense for us to wait until there's a new offensive coordinator in place to talk to him so that we don't have to dream about what he thinks about them. So we have 5 of the 6 defensive freshmen early enrollees. Adan Schuler won't be there because of his shoulder surgery. And then the 2 defensive transfers, and that's Thomas Harper and Javante Jean-Baptiste.
There you go.
Working on my French. So we'll ask them tomorrow, and they may even give us a list of everybody's, but we can track down their uniform numbers. But yeah, I think that's something fans enjoy, getting to know what number certain players going to wear. I'm not as numerical, but I understand the curiosity.
Yeah, I like to know. And obviously it helps when we're looking for guys on the practice field, and the earlier we can learn them, the sooner we can start memorizing them and being ready for spring practice. But we'll see how soon we get that information. I imagine at some point Notre Dame will release an updated roster that'll include numbers as well.
Yeah, I mean, the funniest one with a number for me was it was fall camp, and I go, who is 27? He's making plays all over the field. It was Julian Love. And I didn't expect it because he was a 3-star. I'm like, this is 27 kid. And he ended up being a pretty good player. And Josh Adams surprised me early. I was surprised with this burst. And then I also thought, well, he was a 3-star and he had been injured. So I thought maybe he'd be, moving around a little gingerly, and he just
and I think
out of a cannon.
I know I was in the camp that I thought Dexter Williams would be a more like game ready freshman than Josh Adams was, and it turned out to be the opposite. And then Julian Love, I take some pride in. I nailed that one. I called him the sleeper on signing day that he was going to be underrated based off what he was ranked and rated from the recruiting services, and he made me look smart. So I appreciate Julian Love for that. Although he took a little bit of a shot at the Eagles head coach. Did you see or hear of that?
I did not.
It was on. I think it might have been Good Morning Football, the NFL Network show. I don't know if it was this week or last week, but he was doing some rounds and he said something to the effect like the coach isn't that great. I'm not quoting him. I don't know what he said exactly, but he was like, the players there are the reason that they're winning. It's not necessarily the head coach. So that was kind of interesting, which is, I mean, the Eagles and Giants are pretty big rivals. So, and the Eagles took it to the Giants pretty good there. So maybe not the best idea for Julian Love, who's a pretty media savvy person, but he's also a confident person too. So I thought it was interesting that he sort of maybe stepped in it a little bit there.
Right. So the other reaction to Tommy Rees has been interesting. I've done a little bit of Alabama radio this week.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly I've gotten a lot of emails and correspondences. You guys have let me know what you think about Tommy Rees and have every week of the season.
Right. That's been since 2010.
Yeah. Well, and really, I think in every audience, it has been a really mixed review about how people feel about him leaving. There's people that are worried and concerned, and why would he do this to his alma mater? And there's guys like Tim Brown, former Heisman Trophy winner, that's like, bye, Tommy. Right. And felt like his offense was too predictable and didn't really think of it much of a big deal. I think, Alabama fans, I was doing a radio show, I think it was yesterday, and the guy said, a lot of Alabama fans couldn't wait to get Bill O'Brien, the last offensive coordinator, out of there, and his numbers were dwarfing what Tommy Rees did with different circumstances and different talent.
Right.
So I think they're open. I think they trust Nick Saban's picking of offensive coordinators. They've been surprised enough by picks that didn't look great walking in the door that looked pretty darn good walking out the door. But, it wasn't like people thought they hired, the next offensive prodigy that was going to revolutionize college football. So a lot of mixed reviews with Tommy Rees, which I guess should be expected.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with like people having varying opinions of Tommy Rees. I tend to agree he's better than the negative reaction to him from a vocal part of the fan base. I don't think he's like the world's smartest offensive coordinator or anything like he's not like the best either. Like, so like him jumping to Alabama offensive coordinator is a bit surprising to me. That wasn't on my like bingo list. But I mean, I think it speaks to sort of the respect that he has in the industry, and whether or not it always worked or produced the way that he intended at Notre Dame. Sort of the concepts that went into what he was trying to do are clearly respected. The thing that I probably disagree with the most is the people that are like, this is a lateral move. Why would anyone want to go to be Alabama's offensive coordinator when they're Notre Dame's offensive coordinator? I just like, are you living under a rock? Like, Alabama is the king of college football and has been now. Now they haven't won a national title because Georgia's won it back to back. But like, listen, Nick Saban himself is a bit of a kingmaker. Like, you go be the offensive coordinator there, you have success and you get a better job. Like, that seems to be a pretty predictable pattern. Now, if you don't like Tommy Rees and you don't think he's going to be able to do that, then maybe you say, well, this is kind of a foolish, risky move for Tommy Rees. But I don't know. I disagree with that. Yes, I understand the pride of Notre Dame and you want Notre Dame to be the king of college football, but it hasn't been. And I think, I mean, Tommy Rees doesn't make this decision lightly, I don't think. I mean, he has a tremendous amount of respect for the university and the opportunities that he's been given as a result of being recruited by Notre Dame and having the opportunity to coach at Notre Dame. But I don't know. I just think like it'd be a risk I'd be willing to take. Like, yeah, I'll take the challenge of coaching for Nick Saban and the potential reward that comes from having success at Alabama and the ease of coaching or having such a talented group of players at your fingertips. Like, Alabama's talent level is never questioned. And so Tommy Rees can't. And so if Tommy Rees fails, he can't blame the talent. he's got to succeed. There is pressure that comes to that, but I think if you're a competitor, you welcome that kind of pressure.
Right. I think let's make a prediction on how we think he'll do in his 2 years or so at Alabama.
What how do we make the prediction? I guess are we predicting?
Okay,
Like what happens
let's
to him
say
next?
okay, so we'll say successful would be Nick Saban doesn't kill him, and that he ends up with what he wants to do, which is get into the NFL as an offensive coordinator, and that Alabama's offenses are well regarded. Not being successful would be that he ends up getting fired, or that he gets becomes the pariah of Tuscaloosa.
I will say the first one. I think he will have success. Now I don't. So he has to become an NFL offensive coordinator to reach that,
or
like
a college head
head
coach. But I think
I'm leaning that way. Now it's not like 70% that way and 30. Like it's more like 55-45. Like I don't like. I think I can see it going either way. I'm not. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it going in one direction or the other. But I'm leaning towards him.
And you probably can bet in that in Las Vegas these days.
Probably find some way to bet on that. Which side do you fall on?
I fall on the side that I think he will be successful. I think this is going to turn out to be a good career move for him. I think the caveat with me is, Tommy's antenna was up pretty high at Notre Dame about what the media was talking about, what fans thought about him, and he was able to handle it. But I think that's going to be amplified at Alabama, and he's not going to have as many benefit of the doubt type of people on his side. His former teammates, and so forth aren't going to be necessarily as accessible down in Tuscaloosa. And so he may have to weather a couple storms, but I think he will. I think he's strong enough to. But if that were the place where it went sideways, I think that's where you would earmark it as the start of maybe some problems.
Yeah, and I think you got to circle. I think it's the Texas game. That's the second game of the season. It's like Tommy can't afford to have the early season hiccups on offense that he had sometimes in Notre Dame, which Notre Dame really couldn't afford him to do that either. But Notre Dame sort of wrote it out, and the outrage from the Alabama fan base will be even hotter if the Alabama offense struggles against Texas and can't score enough to beat the Longhorns early on in the season for the Crimson Tide.
The irony is he probably has a better depth of talent in his quarterback room, but not by a lot. And he certainly doesn't have it at the top of the depth chart. I think Sam Hartman is better than what's on Alabama's roster. And how often can you say Notre Dame has the advantage with its number one quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some high hopes for Ty Simpson, who is at Alabama, and Tommy Rees actually wanted him at some point for Notre Dame. And I think that's the same class as Steve Angeli. And Notre Dame sort of circled back on Steve Angeli after offering him early when it was clear that Ty Simpson wasn't going to be coming to Notre Dame. So there certainly is talent on that roster, but it's unproven talent. Certainly no one with the type of resume that Sam Hartman has. And that's one of the interesting layers to this, is that Tommy finally got himself in a position to have the quarterbacks that give him the best chance to have success. And then he got out of here. So whoever replaces him will have the benefit of inheriting a pretty solid quarterback room and quarterback future, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I think we've gone past our hour.
We did, and the Notre Dame women's basketball team has wrapped up a 6-point victory over Pittsburgh. We decided to go through with a live show, even though the women's team was playing, thinking that it would be a bit of a snoozer and Notre Dame would be able to beat up on a not so good Pittsburgh team, but that wasn't the case. So we'll have to catch up on how the rest of that game played out. But we appreciate everyone who has tuned in for the live version of Football Never Sleeps. And for those of you that made it this far in the video after watching it on replay, we thank you as well. We'll be back next week with a night to be determined. We haven't set that up yet, so make sure you subscribe so you can be notified of the upcoming show and when we plan to do that. And we'll also notify you on Twitter, so you can follow us. I'm at TJamesND, Eric's at EHansenND. And as always, you can find us on the Insider Lounge message board and producing content for InsideNDSports.com.